Ah, The Legend of Zelda. I have quite a long history with this series, but unlike other games I've gotten into, I found myself going for long periods without playing a Zelda title. It's usually either something I go back to once a year or so, or when a new game in the series comes out, like in the case of Breath of the Wild. You bet your white fairy tights that I'd go out of my way to get the latest installment of the Legend of Zelda series, and more so that I'll talk about it. To those of you that are expecting a Mega Man and base review, I just want you to know that the gameplay is recorded and I'll be working on that review right after I'm through here. So be patient, you sick bastards. Right now, we have the latest Zelda game to review. This is Breath of the Wild. Normally I'd be going through the story regarding the development cycle of the games I look at, but since there's a lot to cover here, I'm going to cut ahead to the story for the sake of saving time. What I will tell you is that I'm going to be looking at the Wii U version of the game, and not the Switch. You may proceed to snicker while I go get my bat to beat you with. If you're the type to be bothered by spoilers, then this video is probably not for you. The story is an essential part of my reviews, so I need to look at them, even if they are straightforward. Let's go back to the very beginning of Breath of the Wild, before the current storyline. At some point, Ganon decided to stop reincarnating as Ganondorf and is now taking on a new form as a massive cloud of evil energy known as Calamity Ganon. And just a side note for this review, I won't be constantly saying Calamity Ganon, mostly because it's really redundant. I'll just be sticking to Ganon instead. Unlike the other games they're in, the Sheikah in this game have become super nerds and created a massive autonomous army led by 4 giants known as the Divine Beasts. Using this powerful army, that generation's Zelda, along with Link and 4 champions piloting the Divine Beasts, defeated Ganon. Cut to 10,000 frickin' years later, Ganon's influence is growing, warning of his next arrival. The current Hyrule King sought out and found the Autonomous Guardians, and with this generation's Zelda, Link, and 4 champions, they stand by to take on Ganon once again. Unfortunately, Ganon had wisened up quite a bit since his last defeat, and upon his arrival, he possessed the entire army as well as the Divine Beasts. From there, he kills the champions, mortally injures Link, and destroys the majority of Hyrule. Zelda makes a final attempt to stop Ganon by using the Triforce of Wisdom to seal herself and Ganon in the remains of Hyrule Castle, while Link is sent to the ancient Shrine of Resurrection. 100 years pass before Link wakes up to a Hyrule that looks like it's been completely abandoned by civilization, much like how the show Life After People would be in a fantasy setting. After meeting with the spirit of the last king of Hyrule, Link discovers that Ganon is building power again to break Zelda's seal, and he must either free the Divine Beast from Ganon's control or confront him immediately. And that gets me into the gameplay. It's a completely open world, and you can make the decision to go out of your way to make the game easier for yourself, or try to complete the game head on and make it into the new Kaizo Mario, or in this case, Kaizo Zelda. Your pick. With that said, it may actually be impossible for you to defeat Ganon himself without first freeing at least one of the Divine Beasts and getting the power of the champion whose spirit still lies within it. The champion's powers really help in combat situations, and in Ganon's case, I found that it was the only way I can break through his armor. Mipha's Grace revives you from dying in combat, as well as granting you a few extra temporary hearts. Revali's Gale kicks up a tornado that you can use to start a glide from a higher level, which is practically required if you want to get to some of the various Sheikah towers to fill your map. Urbosa's Fury creates a big electrical storm against a targeted opponent, and Daruk's Protection allows you to block and even counterattack an enemy automatically. Each of these powers has a recharge time to prevent it from being abused, but the only one that I find that shouldn't have a recharge time is Revali's Gale, since it's arguably the most benign of the 4. Throughout Hyrule, you can find shrines that act as small dungeons of sorts that offer you spirit orbs upon completion. The first 4 shrines you encounter give you a special skill for your, Sheikah Slate, which is basically an ancient version of the iPad, only with more bombs. The shrines themselves also act as a fast travel point when you activate them, so you can always come back and complete the shrine's trial if you currently lack the ability to do so. The spirit orbs you get can be used at a Hylia statue to get a new heart container or a stamina increase, and I strongly recommend getting a bunch of heart containers as soon as possible, because this game can get pretty fucking hard. Damage in this game is calculated by armor, weapons, and the enemies that are using said weapons. If you're not ready, you'll get destroyed. Let's not forget that the Guardians have been reactivated, and they can easily one-shot you from a huge distance. It doesn't get much more tense than sneaking around a place that's swarming with the bastards and thinking you're in the clear, only for that piano music to cue up and the laser sights start lining up at your butthole like you're the fresh meat in prison. It also doesn't help that every weapon in this game has a durability limit, which really doesn't help when you're in a long and drawn out fight. You also have a limited number of weapon slots, and though you can upgrade to get more, you'd still need to go out of your way to get the Korok seeds necessary to do so. Thankfully, you can also buy a house to store some of your miscellaneous crap at too. What, you didn't think this game couldn't get any more Skyrim vibes? Bollocks to that, I say. There's so much to be had with Breath of the Wild that I can spend all day talking about it, so instead I'll just touch base on the things I like most. Firstly, this game is just enormous. There's a huge sense of atmosphere here, and the variety of environments makes most locations feel very unique. The Divine Beasts are also so large that you can literally see them from across the map, as well as many other large landmarks. Every once in a while, a Blood Moon event occurs, in which previously defeated monsters will rise from the dead and create havoc once more. This is awesome for two reasons. One, it lets you grind for monster materials without running out of resources, and two, it helps give the game a sense of horror. Breath of the Wild has moments that have me on edge more than Minecraft on hardcore mode, especially if I'm in an environment with guardians roaming about. Another great thing about Breath of the Wild is that it follows a formula much like Majora's Mask. The more you go out of your way to do stuff, the easier the game becomes. If you try to rush through it, you will find the challenges to be a lot harder. This is a game where the freaking Master Sword is optional to get, so the game really plays on what you, the player, want to do. Yet if you do take some time to go out of your way to get the hearts and free the Divine Beasts, you'll be treated with some of the best moments I've ever seen in a Zelda game. It could be in the form of a cutscene where Link is trying to piece together his memories, or maybe how you can team up with the heroes of the various races to weaken the Divine Beast before entering them, or maybe, just maybe, cross-dressing to sneak into Gerudo Town is something that you just really want to do. Out of all the cool things, my personal favorites are teaming up with Teba and Sidon in order to take on Valmeadow and Valruda, and the fact that you can tame and ride wild horses, though you would need a lot of stamina and prowl around kinda like a rapist.
Excellent. Naughty. Surprise.
Sadly, for all the good things about Breath of the Wild, there's bound to be some bad things about it too. I want to address the main issue I have first, which doesn't directly involve the game itself. Gaming magazines have been giving Breath of the Wild perfect and near perfect ratings while at the same time ignoring the problems that I will be getting into momentarily. What makes this messed up is that I personally speak as a lower class consumer, and much like anyone in my position, if a game is on a platform of perfection, then I expect my hard-earned money to go into said perfection. And as much as I love Breath of the Wild, I can't say it's perfect. Let's first address the open world factor. The last time Nintendo did anything remotely close to an open world in a Zelda game was Zelda 1 and 2, which was all the way back to the NES, but even then there were still linear elements. Breath of the Wild can be considered as the first full-on open-world Zelda game, and as such it feels more like an experiment. And as with any experiment, there's always a few kinks that can be worked out. For starters, either no limit on items or at the very least, get rid of the durability limit on weapons. This shit was dumb back in Skyward Sword with its shields, and here it can lead to a bunch of frustrating moments when a good weapon you have breaks at the worst possible time. The Master Sword is no exception either. Even though it doesn't break, it does lose energy, eventually becoming unusable for a short time, which is some horse shit. The second is that the opening of the game is very sluggish. When starting out, the King of Hyrule is disguised and offers you the paraglider if you visit all 4 shrines on the plateau. The paraglider is an instrumental tool in the game, so having to make do without it is a big kick in the nuts when starting out. Not to mention that getting up the first mountain without some sort of protection is impossible without cooked food or the warm doublet, which the game offers next to nothing in terms of information. Yet to be fair, this game does set out to get as far away from hand-holding as possible, which it does maybe a little too well. Breath of the Wild's difficulty tends to be all over the place depending on where you go, so it's not uncommon to die repeatedly. A leveling system akin to something like Skyrim to increase your attack or defense would have been a good way to help balance the difficulty. Sure, you can get your armor upgraded at a fairy fountain, but you would need to first find and pay said great fairies like you are in a strip club. Next are the dungeons. The shrines are more like mini dungeons, but if you're playing through the main storyline, the dungeons themselves are the divine beasts. The The designs of these things are cool, fighting their defenses before going inside them is awesome, but completing them is a goddamn cakewalk. Consider this. In other Zelda games, it would take me about an hour to complete a late game dungeon that I know pretty well, even if I hadn't played that game in a while. Each one of the divine beasts took me well under an hour to complete on my first try, and there's only 4. I thought Hyrule Castle would also be a dungeon, but all you have to do is scale it and avoid the guardians until you're inside, then it's final boss time. The Zelda games are known for their dungeons, and the dungeons here, as cool as they look, are pathetic. And the last thing I intend to talk about is something that disappointed me personally. When looking at the trailers, I was under the impression that Link and Zelda would be spending a lot of time together in the story, allowing for Zelda to be a more fleshed out character as opposed to the object of the end goal. But what I saw here were just Link's memories, and Zelda is still just an object to be won at the end. And no disrespect to the voice actor, but this is probably the worst written Zelda I've ever seen. Everything I know about her is through flashbacks, and she's presented as a bit of a selfish prick at first, and then suddenly a distraught princess with little middle ground. Which gets me into the 4 champions, whom I like a lot better than Zelda. But just like Zelda, we don't get to spend much time with them, so we don't get to know how they got their powers, how they came to pilot the divine beasts, or on a more emotional note, how Mipha and Link met in order to justify their relationship. If Breath of the Wild really wants me to care for these characters, it will take much more than just flashbacks in order to get me invested. That's not even considering the bad lip syncing, odd voice acting for Daruk and arguably Zelda, or even how Link acquired the Master Sword in the first place, let alone how it got damaged and repaired so easily. To wrap the gushing and bitching up, Breath of the Wild is a great game. Perfect, however, is a whole different story. There are still good things about it like the breakthrough of voice acting in a Zelda game or the overworld mini-bosses, but there will always be something dumb like needing stamina just to swim or the frequent frame drops. Or Day 1 DLC featuring a new, original story for an extra $20 fucking. I consider Breath of the Wild to be an experimental game in the Zelda series, but it's still a step in a good, innovative direction. Take notes, Sonic Team. This has been Regnilla, and with a new slogan, wishing you to kick ass and not get your ass kicked. Take care, people.